Hi guys. So Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister of Scotland, reacted in a somewhat angry way to a question from a journalist from the Sun newspaper about Scottish independence and how an independent Scotland would deal with the coronavirus. So let's hear what they had to say.
First Minister, as you said, huge borrowing has been required to support the economy in the pandemic, with the 4.6 billion coming to Scotland. You also tweeted about independence this morning. So can I ask, how would an independent Scotland manage such crisis borrowing in its early years, perhaps its first decade, while not having its own currency, which of course is the plan of the SNP's Growth Commission? Because economists and indeed critics within your independence movement have said that without control of monetary policy or an effective central bank, your plan, the sterlingisation plan, could make borrowing more difficult or more expensive. So as well as explaining how we've managed to secure this level of borrowing, can you tell us, does this crisis mean you could now rethink this Growth Commission policy?
I'll come on to the arguments about independence when we're focusing on the arguments about independence. I've got a pandemic to deal with right now, and that's what I'm going to focus on doing. But in short, just in a couple of sentences, maybe the way to answer the question of how would an independent Scotland cope with borrowing is to look at how independent Ireland already does it, or independent Denmark or New Zealand, or any of the other countries across the world that are having to borrow right now. Some of them bigger than Scotland, some of them smaller than Scotland, some of them the same size to Scotland. So maybe there's some lessons to be learned there as well. But I'm going to focus on the pandemic right now, because I think that's what people across the country expect me to do. Tom Gordon from the Herald.
First Minister, they actually have their own currencies though, so that's not.
I'm not. Look, Chris, I am doing a COVID briefing right now. There will be plenty of opportunities in the future for me to get into debates and answer questions about currency, about borrowing rates. That's not what this briefing is for, and I don't think it is what most of the people watching it want to hear. So I've said what I'm going to say. I've tried to answer your question to some extent. You'll get plenty of opportunities in the future to ask me and grill me and scrutinise me and all of these things. And when we get to that stage, I'll be delighted to engage with that. But right now, this is a briefing about COVID, and that's what I'm going to try to stick to.
But it's you who brought up both independence and borrowing today, so that's why I asked you the question.
I tweeted earlier on in response to the Prime Minister's visit that is different to standing here in a Scottish Government building doing a briefing about COVID, and I'm making the obvious point that independent countries the world over borrow money, and an independent Scotland would be in no different position. What I'm saying to you is, if you want to get into the guts and the detail and the intricacies of that, now is not the time for that. I'm more than happy to do that on future occasions. Tom Gordon from the Herald.
Okay, so you can see physically that she's not very happy about this question, but she's right. So, and look, let me place my cards on the table here. I'm not an economist, so my response may make no sense whatsoever. But so she gave some examples here of countries that are able to borrow money. So she gave two examples in particular, Ireland and Denmark. So Ireland, of course, can borrow from the European Central Bank. The situation in Denmark is somewhat different. Now, Denmark is a member of the European Union, but it's not a member of the Eurozone. So its situation is more complicated, I think. Ministerian can probably answer that question, who's probably watching this video, and give a perfect answer. I'm not an expert, and I don't know the situation in Denmark. Now, she also referred to another country, which was New Zealand. Now, New Zealand, of course, is not part of the European Union, so it wouldn't borrow money from the European Central Bank. Scotland may do that in the future. If Scotland became a member of the European Union, it could borrow money from the European Central Bank, so that would eliminate any problems about borrowing. Now, if we look at New Zealand instead, how does New Zealand borrow money? Well, it issues bonds. So because the economy in New Zealand is very strong, they're extremely frugal. They have dealt, for example, with the coronavirus in a very admirable way. They have been able to balance their budgets reasonably well, I think. I haven't been following the New Zealand economy fully, but as far as I know, New Zealand is a good example of a small country doing very well in the world. Of course, New Zealand has many ties with Australia and Asia, so it's not a very good example to compare with Scotland, but it's a small country with a good economy. They've been doing well with the coronavirus. They have a sound government. They have, in general, a strong economy at the moment. Now, if we look at Scotland, you can almost copy and paste some of those things onto Scotland. Now, once again, if this is about bonds, if the Scots can promote themselves as a frugal economy, a strong economy that is working hard to pay those debts back, is capable of paying those debts back, then I don't see them having a problem raising money on the bond market. Otherwise, if they become a member of the European Union, then they can raise money through from the European Central Bank. So, once again, this question doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. But as I said, I'm not an economist, so I don't know if my response is accurate or sufficient for this argument. But let me know in the comments, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. Why not become a Patreon and enjoy access to our Discord server where we share news, chat, and have some fun? If you become a patron, you can also make video suggestions on topics that are important to you. Check it out via the link in the description.